Welcome to the Advntrr podcast, where we discuss the tips, tricks, and strategies to living a location-independent lifestyle. Today, we're talking about how to be an extraordinary guest. And speaking of guests, I have a couple here with me. Well, first off, my lovely co-host, Dieter.
Hello, hello, hello.
And our special guest today is Mr. Graig Ozey.
What's happening, everyone?
Graig is a very good friend of mine who has been living a nomadic lifestyle for a little while now, so he's got a lot of cool things to contribute to our conversation. And yeah, can't wait to get into it.
All right.
So we're talking about being an extraordinary guest. And the reason that we're talking about that is because it just comes up a lot when you're traveling, especially if you're doing it in a more nomadic fashion. Things like couch surfing have really facilitated the whole idea of staying with people a lot. And I know that all three of us have crashed with a lot of people. Maybe I think that's definitely something that is within the nomadic comfort zone or location independence. Whenever you let go of having a permanent home, you're okay with that. I think for most people, probably staying with other people would be taxing.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of really cool benefits to actually staying with someone short term that you don't get when you're staying in a hotel or something like that.
Yeah, I remember you brought it up one time. You were talking about this in terms of business. You were saying that, one of the best ways to get to know somebody that, maybe you want to form a business relationship with or whatever is to just go stay with them. And I was like, oh, wow, that's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty intimate. It's I think a pretty important bond forms between the guest and host. I think there's something special there that happens, and it can serve to not only deepen your relationship with somebody that you may not know all that well, but it also there is that whole thing that we talked about where it can also be an inexpensive way to travel.
That's definitely a plus.
Yes.
Yeah. I do feel like even if I had infinite resources, I would still prefer staying with people, at least to some degree. Not always. It would be nice to, switch it up sometimes. However, it is, like you said, it's just such a great way to bond with people. I mean, Dieter, you've crashed at my places. We've crashed together at other people's places.
Yeah.
And those are always some of the strongest friendships that we've formed have come from those experiences.
Yeah, definitely. Especially my first trip, I went on like a little road trip with a friend. We stayed at the house of a friend of a friend's, basically. And I love that experience so much. And our second trip that we did, we found out about couch surfing. That was in 2007, and I was very, very happy to find out that there's actually a structured way of doing that, so I could keep doing that. And I always think the same thing, just there's so many advantages to doing that you're not in the tourist bubble,
True.
If you're staying at a hotel or something. So
there's something very sterile about staying at a hotel. It's very kind of detached from the actual reality of where you're staying,
Yeah.
And so staying with somebody who's a local kind of immerses you in it,
Right.
When I came up to Grand Rapids, and by the way, this also applies to Airbnb. Like if you're renting out a room, which is usually the cheaper option with Airbnb, people take the rating system on those pretty seriously. So you rate the host, but they also rate you as a guest. And in addition to the fact that you want to form relationships with people and you want them inviting you back, you want them excited that you're there. With all these other modes like couch surfing and Airbnb, it being a good guest is something that is basically, it's on file, so to speak. It's on your record. People rate you. So
yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah. And the most important point that we're going to be talking about today is simply that being a good guest is not something that you are, it's something that you do. So there are certain things that you can do that will universally communicate being a good guest. And we're going to give some specific tips and mindsets to have to make sure that you leave, every time you leave somewhere, you're going to be leaving the place better than when you found it, basically. You're going to get invited back. You're going to leave a positive experience on the people that were kind enough to have you with them, stay with them, and it's going to deepen these relationships and deepen your cultural experience. Even if you're not staying with someone to build a friendship with them, like with couchsurfing, sometimes, you're more there to experience the culture, or you're in town for an event, but you still want to, I don't know, there's some sort of like karma sort of thing, it's always just it's a nice thing. We've heard some horror stories from couchsurfing hosts.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Dieter, do you remember the last people that we stayed with? They had some pretty bad stories about guests that they thought almost ruined couchsurfing for them.
Oh, yeah, the guy that kept commenting on their ass or something? That kept making inappropriate remarks and didn't do anything. And
and that stuff, that's pretty common, human interaction guidelines, but there are some specific things too that will just always show up as being a good guest and will leave a good impression on your hosts.
That's so. Was it a woman, like a woman who had a guy couch surfer?
Yeah,
the host.
That's the kind of guy you want on your couch, right? In his boxers, like,
and he was
cracking open a PBR and
he was like drinking the whole time. He was like drinking bottles of liquor on their couch, like not drinking together, not partying, not having a good time or sharing anything. It was just he would go to the liquor store, get a bottle of like vodka or something, and just sit on their couch and hit on them and get drunk. So
that's the first two rules.
Yeah, first two rules. Don't do that.
That's the thing as well. Like that's a blatant. Like that's a thing you can call out. You can be like, dude, you're doing this and this and so, and you're annoying us, and you have to go. But you can also be just a slightly annoying guest, like someone who's a little too intrusive, and people are uncomfortable around you, but they don't know how to say, you're not doing something that bad that warrants kicking you out.
So that's a big one. I'm glad that you that's one of the things that we're going to talk about is that most of the time people aren't going to tell you, they're not going to say, especially for small stuff like that, even though it can leave an important impression. A lot of times people don't, especially for things like Airbnb or couch surfing or even staying with a friend, like they're not going to tell you most of the time. This is stuff that is so much more powerful if you haven't figured out for yourself and you use some of these tips that we're going to give you on your own. You do it proactively, so to speak. So.
Right. And once you have these tips, you can kind of build a plan so that you don't have to think about it every single time you stay with somebody. Just follow the same procedure with everybody, and it will pretty much, it will universally work because, well, you'll see in a second, but just follow these few steps and it'll work every single time you stay with somebody to have a much better experience, leave a much better impression. And and when you do that, something that you pointed out to me yesterday, Greg, is that by taking care of these little things that might usually strain your relationship with your host, if you can kind of make sure to proactively reduce or eliminate those little things, then the host is going to be more, they're going to have more energy left over to actually hang out with you, to actually get to know you. So that's a really cool thing too. It's going to enrich your experience of staying with this person because they're going to be more free to share the cool things about their life with you. If they're not worrying about, like, is he going to keep doing that? Is he going to keep, leaving things in the sink or whatever? Like, we'll talk about some specific examples, but
I like the example that you gave me, and it's so succinct of how people actually tend to think. You were talking about that Brazilian girl who had cooked you. I don't know if you could tell that story.
Yeah. Actually, Dieter was there with me.
Yeah.
She's actually Colombian. She was a very wonderful, wonderful girl, good friend of ours. And there was just this one day where, seemingly out of nowhere, she was very kind. She made us a really awesome breakfast. And then a couple hours later, she came in to the living room where we were both, doing our geeky thing on our laptops or whatever. And she was like, I'll make you breakfast, but I'm not your fucking mother. And so she said, you're going to have to clean your own dishes. And to me, it was just like, what? Where did that come from? You know, like, it was just all of a sudden she was upset about this. But the way that people act is we're not even conscious of this ourselves. You know, we're just like subconsciously we're being bothered by something. And every time we see it, it keeps checking in and saying, and poking our brain, you know, and saying, hey, that thing's out of place. You have to remember that this is someone's home, and we all have our weird things about where we live. Like every single one of us is weird, and you might think that you're not, and there are no steadfast rules to this. Like every single person is different, but we'll give you a technique to figure out exactly like how each person sees their home and the way that they want it to be treated. But everybody has specific rules, and you don't know exactly what everyone's rules are, except...
And often they don't know.
Because by having someone stay in their space, that's also introducing a new thing that's not normal for them. Even if they're used to having couch surfing guests or whatever, it's still a new thing that they have to figure out. And it's an extra burden, you know, even if they really thoroughly enjoy the experience. It's just something that has to be kind of figured out and worked out.
By having people over, I've noticed that, like, I remember I was in the Dominican Republic, and at the time I actually had my own place, and there's a whole community of internet marketers and travelers down there. And my friend Bruce comes over for the first time, and I'm sitting at my living room table, and you know he's a gregarious, talkative guy. And he like sits down at the table, leans back, puts his feet on my table, and I'm like, Bruce, what are you doing? He's like, what do you mean, what am I doing? I was like, get your feet off my table. and that's a thing for me. Right. For whatever reason, the way I was raised, you don't put your feet on. It's the equivalent of taking a crap in someone's living room. You know? And so, but I didn't realize I had that until he did it.
Right.
You know? And I was like, I guess that's a weird thing for me because you don't put your feet on. I never put my feet on my own table and somebody else doing it. Like, I took offense to that, even though for him it was just like, cool, I'm making myself at home. Like, it's not, you know, it wasn't a thing for him.
No,
you know?
He wasn't disrespecting you. He was probably just showing you that he was comfortable. He was
my visceral response is that he was.
Right, exactly. And we all have these things. Do you have any stories like that come to mind, Dieter?
Yeah, a few. One good one and one bad one.
Okay.
One of the first times I hosted, I was still living with my parents, and there were two South Korean girls. And one of them, after she took a shower, she just put up all of her underwear in the shower to dry. And my mom would come in, and she would just think it's funny. She's like, she did something weird, you know? So that was a good one. But there's also things like, for example, I hosted a Canadian guy once, and although I got along with him very well, he was a little too relaxed at home. I don't know. You kind of want to find a balance there. Like, for example, we were living in a house with 5 people, and he would very, very much take his time making his personal meal, even though like people were waiting to use the kitchen as well. So there's little things like that that'll just, you know, you want to call it out, but you don't want to be a dick, but still it's going to annoy you.
Well, that's
the most dangerous thing.
And that's a great point is, you know, we don't want to be dicks, but we do, but we feel the tension of having someone in our space. And to some degree, that's probably just always going to happen. But there are things you can do to minimize that. And, you know, all of us can always work on getting better. It doesn't mean you're a rude person if you don't understand exactly how each person's living space operates. You just have to put in a little kind of detective work, I think of it as detective work, to figure out what their rules are and then try to abide by them as best you can.
Yeah. I was going to say that one thing to start with is noticing the unusual. When you travel enough, you probably notice that you have habits yourself that are jarring or, you know, that catch people's attention or whatever when you stay with them. And as an example, actually, when I was staying in Grand Rapids, I think the last place that I stayed at, when I first started talking with them online, I told them the 2 unusual things that I do and asked them if it was okay. And and I framed it early on. And the thing that came to mind was that it's like, hey, I'm eating a certain way. I'm eating a certain diet right now. The first day that I get there, I'm going to cook a whole bunch of food and put it in plastics. And then I'm probably not going to really I'll probably use your microwave or whatever. And is that cool? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's fine. Now, that would have been different had I just shown up, and then, like, day one, they walk into the kitchen, and I've got, like, 4 pots going. I'm cooking. I'm, like, chopping vegetables, and they got stuff all over the place. That would have definitely been jarring to them.
Yeah.
But because I was like, this is probably the one thing that would be weird to people if I take over their kitchen for a few hours and I mass cook all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell is this guy doing? You know? But because I framed it ahead of time, it wasn't a big deal. But I could totally see that being, oh my God, who did we invite to stay here? Like, what is he like feeding a bunch of people?
Right.
What is he doing? So taking that one thing that you think is make a list of the things that you think are unusual or that might be jarring to somebody and frame that at the beginning. And even in the discussion about planning and all of that, put that in there. Say, I'll probably be staying out there. Is that cool? And by the way, this is this thing that I do. And I would like pick the most extreme thing that you do. That way it's, there is actually an agreement there. And that can make a really big difference. Cause at some level when they're agreeing to you staying, it's like, okay, well, cool. For one day, he's going to be cooking all this food or whatever. It's not a big deal.
Right.
But yeah, really stepping into their perspective and thinking, what would it be like if I had somebody stay at my house and I walked downstairs and they had just bought 5 bags of groceries and they had turned my kitchen into a mini like restaurant,
Right.
Like if I had no idea what he was doing, that would be weird. So find what that is for you. Like if you have a early schedule, if on Fridays and Saturdays you expect to be out drinking or whatever, like I'll probably come in late on Friday and Saturday. Like find that one extreme thing that you might be doing and frame that from the beginning. That way it's implicit in the agreement.
That's a great point.
Especially I like from your example, the time constraints, like the 1 day part. Because when they're going to be coming in and seeing you cooking, the first thing they'll probably think is he going to be doing this every day?
Exactly.
Like, you don't want to have that. Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and run a little bakery from your house. Nice kitchen, guys.
This actually reminds me of a conversation we were having that sprang from Graig. His family's from Turkey, and he actually spent a good portion of your teenage years in Turkey.
Yeah.
And you were saying that there's a specific sort of Turkish hospitality. Like, what are some of the tenets of Turkish hospitality? I was curious to know a little bit more about that.
Gotcha. Well, they just take it really seriously down there. It's very similar. There's that whole stereotype of like the Italian family, like they're going to feed you and that kind of stuff. And they're very big about like it's in that whole part of the world. And I think it's a pretty common thing in Europe in general, but like in that whole part of the world, the guest host relationship almost has like it almost has like this elevated thing. Like if you're hosting somebody, there's a big responsibility for you. And in fact, like there's this, even in Greek mythology, there's this whole thing that it's actually a sacred relationship. Like it's a whole thing. Like when you host somebody, it really is like you taking them into your space, you protecting them, you helping get their needs met and everything. And so they're anytime that there'd be somebody coming over or staying, it would be this whole thing of like, okay, we got to prepare this, prepare that. And my sister-in-law is actually Japanese, and I went to Japan for their wedding, and I definitely saw it with her parents as well. Like I get there and they actually have a new pajama set laid out for me on my bed. They didn't even know me.
Oh shit.
And they, at the time I think I was like 19 and I was a smoker. And they saw that I was a smoker, so I came back. Like after the first day, I came back. There was a carton of cigarettes.
Really?
Jeez.
And this is the most hilarious part. They, I think they got it in their heads that like Turkish people eat yogurt, and it's true. But like I don't know where it came out, but like I remember we were all sitting down for like I think it was like the second day, and my sister-in-law's mom comes out there and proudly gives us a thing of yogurt, which apparently in Japan is really hard to get. Like they don't eat that stuff, especially like, back in the day. I think 70% of Asians are lactose intolerant or something, so they don't have that lying around. So she actively went out and did that, and they were amazing hosts. And a big thing about being a good guest is acknowledging that and not feeling entitled to any of it, even if it's a close friend of yours. I think especially if it's a close friend, but also with somebody that you haven't met before, somebody who's on couch surfing. Like it's a muscle that you build, acknowledging the things that people are doing, whether it's cooking you breakfast like the Colombian girl, and we need to definitely loop back to that at some point, but like building that bit of like, oh, I really appreciate you doing this. I really like calling it out and saying thank you is one thing. Another thing is like, be specific. Like I really, I haven't had this kind of breakfast before. Like actually comment on it specifically. It's a thing. Like a lot of times, again, people don't say what they want. They don't know what they want necessarily, but feeling appreciated and acknowledged is kind of a big deal. So the better you get at pointing out even the little things that they're doing, will make a difference.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, when you stayed in Japan, did you also look into like cultural, I don't know, norms, or like when you came in to take off your shoes or something like that?
One thing that I didn't realize at the time was that Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in one of his books. There's this whole idea that like some cultures are receiver oriented and other ones are sender oriented. And what I mean by this is, in some cultures, the responsibility is on the listener to figure out what the other person is saying. In other cultures, the responsibility is on the communicator to be clear about what they communicate. So in the United States, it's very clear. It's like, if you want something, you have to be clear about it. Mm-hmm. In Japan, it is a stark contrast. It's very much a receiver oriented. And what I mean by that is that I'm walking out with, let's say Brad and I are going for a walk, and like, hey, what sounds really good right now is a beer. It's hot outside. Let's step in this place and grab a beer. And how about you get my beer since I got breakfast? It's very straightforward. We're friends. We're close. Mm-hmm. In Japan, that same exchange would be like, you'd walk by a place and one person would say, what I would say in that culture is, I'm kind of thirsty right now. Right? And it would be, the responsibility would be on Brad to be like, hey, how about I get you a beer? And I'd be like, oh, no, that's not a big deal. It's like, no, seriously, I should get you a beer. It's like, okay. Like, the responsibility there was Brad to figure out that I'm asking for something. And understanding your host, like which one your host is or where your host lies on that spectrum, is important, because a lot of times, again, if they expect you to figure this stuff out, what will happen is that if you don't, they'll resent you silently, like that Colombian girl. Mm-hmm. And then it feels like it comes out of nowhere. It's like, I'm not your mom. Like, right. What the hell does that mean? Yeah. In her mind, it was like, I made you guys breakfast. You guys should know that. In her mind, she had this whole thing about that. And so, unbeknownst to you, she has this story in her head about like, oh, they're not. Oh, no. It's going to be one of those guys again. Right. And it comes out like in this burst of like, I'm not your mother. And it's like, whoa, where did that come from? Yeah. So you figuring that out for yourself is a big part of kind of gauging your host and understanding how you can be a good guest. And
that actually brings up one of our big techniques here, which is a question that you can ask at the beginning of any one of your stays to try to figure out what is going on inside your host's mind. What are their stories? What are their expectations for a guest-host relationship? And that's simply by asking this question right in the very beginning when you first arrive. And that is, while I'm staying here, how can I make sure to be a good guest? And some people might be like, oh, don't worry about it, make yourself at home, whatever. But I'm going to be testing this, actually, because I actually crash with a lot of people. I've pretty much been crashing with people for about 3 years. It actually started with Graig, and
Nice.
is currently with Graig. I'm actually crashing with Graig right now.
And the funny thing is that Brad actually, as we were kind of talking about this the other day, Brad was like, he stopped for a minute and he looked at me, he's like, so Graig, how can I be a good guest? And then immediately I was like, oh, shit. And Brad and I have known each other for a long time. We're very close friends, and it was still like, okay, I had to like think about it. And I thought of a few things. It's usually not that easy. Most of the time they'll be like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. And so you have to kind of extract it out of them a little bit. And one of the things to do is that if they can't come up with anything, give a couple of examples if you can. Like, usually after I eat, after I cook something, I will sit down and eat it, and then as I'm eating, I usually will leave whatever I used to cook it in the sink. But when I'm done, I'll clean it. Like actually, future pace a couple of things that you think might make you a good guest. Like, and again, you have to kind of pry a little bit. You have to ask like.
But they'll be happy that you're prying in this case.
And another good one is that woman was giving you the horror stories. Mm-hmm. What she's basically doing is giving you the inverse of what she expects to happen. So if you listen to somebody's like, so have you been doing couch surfing for a while? It's like, yeah. And has that gone well? It's like, well, there was this one guy. And listen to what they're saying. Inside of what they're saying is their expectation of what a good guest is. They may not be able to describe a good guest, but people are pretty good at describing the bad ones.
That's a good point. What do you think about that question, Dieter? If I were to ask you, if I were to stay with you in Ostend, and I said, and I literally would, I'm going to be staying with one of my best friends next week in North Carolina, and I'm going to start off the trip by asking him this question, because it's his space, and I want to be a great guest. So I'm literally going to ask, while I'm staying here, how can I make sure to be a good guest? And so if I were coming to visit you in Ostend and I just arrived, I would ask you the same question. While I'm staying here with you, Dieter, how can I make sure to be a good guest? What would you say?
I tend to want to come across as more easygoing than I am in that case.
Nice.
So that's the thing. Like, I like the prying thing that Graig was talking about, because my first reaction will be, nah, just pretend like you're at home. I'll take care of everything for you.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I am taking care of everything, and you're just kind of like, I don't know, not showing acknowledgement or appreciation or making extra demands or something.
Yeah.
Or just not doing anything out of your own initiative. I don't know, I kind of operate that way, where I'm going like, no, you don't have to do anything, but secretly expecting people to still offer things,
Yeah, I really think everybody would. I think there would be a lot of people nodding along right now, because all of us have our expectation of what we think is relaxed, and I think we all think that we're pretty like down-to-earth, chill people.
Yeah.
And we are by our own standards, but my version of chill and down to earth and relaxed is not the same as yours, and it's not the same as Graig's, and it's not the same as everyone else's. We all have different definitions. Like, you said a few things in there that are kind of tough to define. So that tells me that you have your own definitions for them, but other people might disagree, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
What did you say? I think you said like considerate or something like that. Like, that's actually a really hard word to define. That would be differently defined to everyone. To some people, it might be considerate to, clip their toenails in your bathroom instead of your living room. But they wouldn't think of cleaning them up, because at their own house, they just kind of let the toenail clippings accumulate on the floor.
Yeah.
Just to use a very visceral example. I mean,
what house did you grow up in?
But that might literally happen.
The consider, like you did it the other day. I've been making breakfast, and the other day you hopped up. You're like, "Hey, how can I help?" and you start emptying the dishwasher.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself was like, oh, cool. Like it was one of those things where you were mindful of what I was doing. There was an acknowledgement that I was making everyone breakfast, and it was like, hey, how can I help? And you just started doing it. Like that's kind of a big deal. Even, when Nancy came over the other day,
Mm-hmm.
and I gave her a coffee,
Mm-hmm.
and before she left, she was like, where do I put this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't just assumed that like she's going to leave it there, and little stuff, it really makes an impact to people. There's a sense of like, I want to have that person back. Like they're mindful and considerate. To me, it means being mindful of like what the other person's, in a non-intrusive way, being mindful of what the other person's life is like and adding to it, so to speak. So, in your case, that whole bit about the underwear in the shower or whatever, she might do that in Korea, but had she stopped for a moment and thought, well, I don't see any other underwear hanging in this bathroom.
Right.
That might be kind of weird. That would be a good time to ask, like at the beginning, especially.
Yeah.
It depends on the length and duration of your stay, and it does change a little bit if you're going to be staying with someone for a while. There are certain things that you want to frame early on, but
Yeah, definitely.
But that thing that you said, where it's like, I like to come across as more easygoing than I am. That's always the case with people. They don't want to be like, and I appreciate when people have very defined rules. Sometimes it's like, it might come across a little bit weird at first, but it's way better than, them silently resenting you because you can feel it,
Right.
That's actually the mark of an experienced couchsurfing host. Because if you look on their profiles, the more experienced they are, the more like almost cynical sounding lists of rules they have. Where it's like, you come in and you leave when I leave, and you get a key, but blah blah blah. They always have these huge amounts of rules, because
They're specific. Yeah.
Through that, yeah, they've been too easygoing in the past, and they've been annoyed. And
It's a good point.
Another one is that whole gauging your host in the sense of like, sometimes people who are hosting people are very social, and they're doing it for the social aspect. They like to talk. They like to know what you're doing there. They want to like tell you about the places. And there are other people who are, and you can tell this fairly early on. It's good to pay attention to it. Like, they're very like matter of fact. They like to remove themselves out of the equation, and they're not like, usually at the beginning, you want to spend a couple of hours building rapport with them, getting an idea of who they are, and letting them like feel comfortable with you. Humans just need to do that with each other. You have a new person in your house. There is a sense of like, who is this person? And if you spend a couple hours or a little bit of time, like having a discussion, talking about what you're doing, and, ask them questions and just building that rapport, that makes a really, really big difference. But some people want to leave it at that. They're not like, okay, now I'm going to be working, don't bother me. And other people are going to be like, oh, so what are you doing? Oh, you did it. And like that, I think the second woman I stayed with in Grand Rapids, you might remember, she like, was her and her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
She would talk my ear off.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could have asked her to come out with me and go out. She would have totally done that. The last people I spent time with, we had a very short discussion at the beginning, and I got the sense they were both very busy. The guy had an office downstairs. The woman was going to be gone. And aside from our initial interaction, we didn't really talk that much.
Yeah.
And so, but had I been like, hey, what are you doing? You want to talk?
Right.
I felt like they would not have appreciated that. The other woman would have been like, oh, great.
Yeah.
This jackpot.
on a side note, if you know yourself, whether if you're the type of person that wants to hang out with your host, or if you just want to stay there, maybe have some conversation, but then go do your own thing. That's a big factor for me to choose between couchsurfing and Airbnb, because with Airbnb, you're kind of paying for the liberty of not having to do all that,
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with couchsurfing, it's a little more expected that, in general, But it's a good point, yeah, that everyone's different. And I've stayed at places where they're just like, all right, here's a key. And we basically barely talk, and I just stay there and hang out and go do my own thing. And other people who just want to show me the whole city and hang out constantly.
My new best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you framing that early on would be really helpful too. Like when you show up, it's like, by the way, I every now and again I'm kind of like an introvert, and I'll kind of keep to myself every now and again. Like actually just framing that early on, so they're again the more you can manage their expectations, the less jarring anything you do will be. So if you show up and you're like, and I'm kind of a quiet person on some days, I'm just not as talkative, then they're not going to be like, is there something wrong? Because again, this people do. They like make up stories in their head. So if early on you frame that, on the other hand, with me being a high extrovert, I could be like, by the way, stop me if I'm beginning to talk your head off, because I'll just keep talking. And I get that you're busy and you have stuff going on, so don't ever hesitate to, you can tell me to shut up if it feels like I'm being a little bit too social. So
this is actually it's making me realize how great being a guest is at teaching you about your own strange behaviors and habits, and helping you to empathize and understand what's going on in other people's heads. So this is really amazing. Dieter, I know you have some pretty cool, like, general guidelines for being a great guest that I think everyone would really like to hear. Would you mind taking us through a few of those?
Yeah. There's one thing I wanted to mention was, and as a 30 and a half year old, I feel like you can talk to the young kids now and give them advice. But basically, I feel like more and more in our especially our cultures and Western cultures, we lose etiquette. We don't really have the basic rules like, oh, you meet this kind of person, give him a handshake. You meet that kind of person, give him a kiss on the cheek or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so basic things like showing up as a gentleman with a gift, that's never going to be unappreciated. That's always going to show some thanks, as well as something that I used to have. I'm an only child, and I was always a little spoiled, as in I was just sitting in my room messing around with computer until someone yelled from downstairs that dinner was ready or my laundry would be done for me. Like I never really did a lot of chores.
Yeah.
And then when I started traveling, like I think my first experience with that was staying over at a friend's house when I was little, and they had 6 kids. So all the kids were very independent. And I would just be sitting at the lunch table going like, Can I have a sandwich with cheese, please? And the mom just went like, make it your fucking self, And I didn't really know how to handle myself. And I think that came back to me as well when I started backpacking, where it's just, I didn't know how to do laundry. I didn't know what to do. And that's why I like what you guys were saying as well. Ask how you can help, even if you don't know. Because my problem, I think, was just not seeing work, just not seeing things that could be done. So yeah, at the very least, be aware of, it costs energy to have you there. It costs energy it's an investment for them to give you food, to have you stay over. So if you sort of make it break even for them on the energy level, I think that's a very
even
good
if like
place.
they're cooking something for you and you're just keeping them company,
Yeah.
You mentioned like I will be in front of my computer until somebody calls meals ready. Like a tweak in this case would be like, well, they're cooking, so I'll if like it's a friend or whatever, I'll just keep them company, and that you're at least engaged with them. So
yeah.
What other etiquette things can you think of in terms of like, because I like the point that you make where you said that like people have kind of lost that,
Yeah.
That's actually a really good point.
Yeah. I was thinking of the gift ring, but also just things like being aware of the fact, for example, if you're sleeping on the couch, they're going to be using that couch during the day, so just fold up your sheets or something. If you're going to be leaving on day, it's all symbolic things, If you're going to be leaving, fold your sheets, and even though they're probably just going to crumble it up and throw it in the washer or something, but at least make it look clean what you're doing.
I think that kind of speaks to a more general rule that is always good to apply. And you might have a little battle with your inner monologue or your expectations with this, but basically a general rule that helps in every situation is return things to the way that they were before you. For example, if you're staying on someone's couch, it's always best to keep like just to return the couch to its previous state before you were sleeping on it, even every day. You know, you mentioned doing it as you leave, but I know that you and I, the last time we stayed with hosts, we made sure to put our things away every single day. Now that costs you energy, obviously. And if you were in your own house, you wouldn't do that. You would just, well, actually, I'm speaking for myself here. Some people would put their stuff back where it belongs. I tend to, whenever I have my own room, it's completely, like, everything is completely scattered everywhere. So it's very unnatural for me to put things back into their containers. So that costs a lot of energy for me. But it's just one of those things that whether you do this yourself or not, this is just the way people operate. They want their living space to be the way that it is. And even if you look at the way that they live and it seems messy to you, they think it's perfectly as clean as it needs to be. And even adding your pile of messy clothes to their own piles of messy clothes would be
It's jarring.
jarring.
Yeah. They're used to their mess.
They're used to their mess.
Yeah.
Any other mess is going to be extra to them. So just as a general rule, return things to the way that they were before you use it. And that's not always 100% achievable. You know, obviously they're going to be aware of that too. They're letting somebody stay with them. But that's kind of the general rule that it's always good to get better and better at, is just returning things to as close as possible to the way that they were before you were, using it, basically. That means, when you use dishes, washing the dishes, basically. Now this one, particularly, like, Dieter, I'm really glad you kind of gave me some perspective, because I actually never had to do dishes either as a kid.
Yeah.
So I'm now realizing that's why I've always had this thing where I, like, hate doing the dishes. I never had to. My mom would just do my dishes for me, and I sure appreciated that when I was a teenager.
You don't think about it.
No, you don't think about it. And
that's that thing that somebody else does.
Right, exactly. So, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what long story and history I have with it. It just, people appreciate it when you do especially if you use the dishes on your own, then you just have to, like, clean them, or at least put them in the dishwasher if that's their system. Like, figure out what their system is and just do it. You just have to do it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just gonna, like you said, it's gonna restore that cost of energy back to, like, being equal.
The thing about showing up with a gift, it is a big deal, and I think it, like, even as a minor token, it makes a difference. Like, I remember my uncle back in the day, like, I would always ask him, in his family, I would always ask him, should I bring anything? Should I bring something? It's like, no, don't worry about it. And then one time I had my friend from college come visit us. He stayed with me and my uncle, and he showed up with a bottle of wine. He only stayed there for a few days. And my aunt and uncle wouldn't shut up about it. They were like, I was so considerate, and they don't even really drink wine. It was just that he showed up with that. A person they didn't know showed up with that thing, with a gift, which means that they put some thought into it, right? And another thing is, and again, this involves money, but there's something to this. If you're staying with a friend, if you're staying with somebody that you have a relationship with, there's one thing to show up with a gift, but also leave them something. But when you hang out with somebody and you get a sense of, like, it can even be something practical, like the last house I stayed with in Grand Rapids, I saw that they had, at the time I didn't have a whole bunch of money to spend, but I saw that they would stock up on, in their pantry, they stocked up on these Diet Coke, or these Coke bottles or whatever. And when I left, I was like, by the way, I just got you a 6-pack of the Coke stuff. And no matter what, it has an impact when you leave. Like, there's this, there's actually something cool when some, kind of an advantage that you have when somebody isn't expecting something. So even if it's small, you leaving with a gift will have an impact. So
That is an awesome point.
Yeah.
We'll wrap up here in a few minutes, but that reminds me of something, Dieter, you and I discussed, which is that one of the things that runs in the back of people's minds when you're staying with them is that you use up certain things just by being a guest. For example, toilet paper. It sounds like such a small deal, But when you know you're used to buying, let's say, 4 rolls a week or whatever, and now you're going through 4 rolls every 3 days, that's just a built-in weird thing that, like, we're weird. People are weird. We have these little things that we're keeping track of, and we all have things just exactly how we like them. And when things change about that, we get weird. And that's one thing that I've noticed. And you can't help it, right? I mean, you got to use toilet paper, but that's just that's a universal thing that by being a guest in someone's home, you're going to be using a faster rate of toilet paper than they're used to, and it's going to be weird to them, and they're not going to like it.
Yeah. And one other thing as well, like that I would want to stress here with what I was trying to say with the etiquette and what Graig was illustrating as well, is always err on the safe side. If you're not really sure how to behave, just behave better than what you would think would be okay. Same thing with the gift. I think I always had this thing where if I would bring wine, I would not bring it because I would think I don't know if they drink wine or not, Whereas no one ever says, "Oh, you brought wine, but we don't drink wine,"
Yeah.
What the fuck is this?
Yeah.
Yeah, what the fuck is this? Yeah. Consider it. We're all alcoholics.
Yeah, this is kind of a strange. This might be a strange take on this, but I also know that, like, again, this might be the culture that I was raised in and such. But, like, I think a part of, I'm going to wrap up with this. I was going to say a good part of being a good guest is also receive. Like, it's fun to host people. It's fun to cook for them, to make sure they're getting their needs met. Like, there's something exciting about hosting people. So a lot of times actually receiving from people is hard. They're like, "Oh, you shouldn't have done it." Oh, they have this whole thing like they don't want to come across as like a burden or whatever. People enjoy hosting and your friends and such. So actually receiving, acknowledging it, and I think there is, like, I mean, picture for a minute that somebody gave you a Christmas gift, right? Or no, you just gave somebody a Christmas gift and they open it up and they're like, "Oh, you shouldn't have. Oh, like, you really shouldn't have done that." Like, or as soon as they open it up, they're like, "You know what? I got you something too." And immediately they go into that thing versus like, "Holy shit, thank you. That's exactly what I wanted." Like, that's the reaction you want from somebody when you give them a gift. And this, I think it's the same thing with the host-guest relationship. Like, receive what they're doing. Like, you don't have to, like, if you're confident in being a good guest, then appreciate them being a good host and just receive it,
That is
I like that point.
An excellent point. I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. Anything you want to add, Dieter?
Nah, I'm good.
All right. So a few reminders for some of the things that you can do every single time you stay with somebody to help to make sure that you're an extraordinary guest and that they'll welcome you back with open arms is bring a gift. That's a really awesome tip. That's just going to work the whole world over. And possibly leave a gift if that's also a great tip. Ask them at the start of your stay how you can be a good guest while you're staying with them. That's going to give you some clues into some of the expectations that they have, and it's not an authoritative thing. It's just how they see their world, and it's going to help you to navigate those waters. Pay attention to how they treat their own environment. Kind of do some detective work, even though they don't tell you all the rules that they have in their head. They definitely have them. So just watch how they behave in their own environment and try to blend in with that. And as a general rule, always return things to the way that they were as much as you possibly can. So those are some general tips that are going to work no matter what, no matter where you are. Apply them and see people be much happier that you stayed with them. So thank you so much for joining, Graig. It was really awesome to have you.
It was great talking to you guys.
You were a really wonderful guest, so you must be practicing these skills. And Dieter, thank you again for taking the time out to chit-chat with me.
No worries.
And we're all looking forward to talking to you again.